welcome. Thank you all for coming to the Charlevoix Circle of Arts for our final Dream to Reality Gallery talk. I'd like to welcome Charlevoix artist and author Kim Richelle, who's going to give a final talk and kind of wrap up this exhibit, which has just been amazing. Thank you again for being here. Kim's books are for sale, and she'll be available after to sign and personalize if you would like. So, thank you, Kim. Welcome.
Thank you. And Ms. Could, I haven't been unemotional for the last 5 weeks, so this one could be worse still. Because I have to start thanking you, Sarah, and Erica, and Mary, from the Circle of Arts, from the bottom of my heart, they let me paint the walls, they let me splatter paint, they let me do so much of my peculiarities, and I'm grateful. And my Jennifer, where are you? My editor, my friend, my darling, my lavender bee, thank you for everything, and continued. You're stuck with me for a while. And just in general for the community, because this is my town. This was my library. You know, this was, the library was my middle school, so I'm especially grateful that the town itself is receptive. I sometimes do better in other places. What do they say about the prophet in her own village? So I'm going to get at it because it's long, because I thought this is the last one and I've got a lot to say and we'll see how it goes. Like, you know, if you get tired of me, that's okay too. So I'm calling it Loops and Braids because I've been told, not just by Jen, she was the third person to tell me that I talk in loops and that maybe that's my style and maybe that's what I do. The first one was my therapist and the second one was my attorney. So the third one being my editor, it makes perfect sense, right? So, and what each of them said is that remarkably, I'll be following you around that loop and I think, where in the world is she going? And then I will come back to what I wanted to say. And I think it's a little avoidance on my part, like a little bit like I've been drawing pictures in code since I was a little girl to get away with the things that I wanted to say. And in recent years, specifically with Banshee, I've been telling more of the truth. And that was from my friend Stephen, that if you've been to any other talks, you know that I met a young boy when we were 11 years old, the first day of 6th grade. Miss Pete was our teacher, and I met him because as I was coming down the hall in 1972, in the hall of the middle school that's now our library, there were a group of kids I'd known since kindergarten who were shoving him into a locker. That's the first time I saw him. And he's a gay man, but we were 11, you know? And the horror of that vision, that I kind of went into full blowout rage. And I went to him and stood between him and the bullies, and I was like, get away from him. Like, what's the matter with you guys? These are guys I'd known since kindergarten. Like, what is wrong with you? And they scattered. And that's when he tells the story. He's like, you have to keep in mind that I wasn't a tall boy, and Kim was about this big. So I'm looking over her head at all the big guys just scattering because she was so ferociously angry. And when I turned around, he was streaked in tears. And we hugged, and I apologized to him for everything. And we were best friends for 40 years. He died when we were 51, 9 years ago. We always celebrated this period of time as our birthday, between his Taurus birthday and my Gemini birthday. So when I found the show was going to be the day before his birthday, the opening, that convinced me that maybe we could pull it off, and that he'd help. So that's my first loop. So the first line I wrote today is, I'm a kind of magnet for narcissists. And I'm afraid that's by design. So over the last 20 years or so, I learned the words for what has always been gnosis, the wordless knowledge just over 20 years ago, I went into therapy and learned a language of understanding. It was the year I turned 40, and just accidentally started my first indie press out in left field. And it was The Day We Flew. So I just finished that book, and then I called a man that I'd known indirectly. You guys know him, my therapist. He was a friend of my first husband's, and I called him out of the blue, and I'm like, I think I need to come in. And there's a whole story about how I got his receptionist, and she's like, he's booked solid, and he called me the next day, and he's like, what do you need? So when I went in, he's like, what are your goals in therapy? And I said, I just want to survive Christmas. And he told me, after a year of intensive therapy, that he thought that was hilarious at the time. Like, of course you're going to survive Christmas. And he did a lot of those, like, of course you're going to survive Christmas. Of course your parents aren't coming to your little brother's wedding. Of course this. Like, why do you think these things? And it's because they were my experience, and they were what was happening. And so we did survive Christmas of 2000. And we did reveal why. My mother is psychotic, and our relationship began with my breech birth. She was 20 years old, ferocious, natural childbirth, powerful woman, brilliant woman, creative, and she felt an emptiness inside of herself. And so I know my breech birth, but first, that's how I came into the world, humiliated her. And in her humiliation, that established our relationship. And from birth, and I believe all of us from birth see the lights, experience spirit, have this memory of otherness that isn't incarnate. And I was sitting on the floor and interacting with the lights, just delighted with the lights and the colors, and she attacked me. She attacked me. And it was years later in therapy that that's all came out. And Jim said, did it ever occur to you that she must have seen what you were seeing? Why else would she have hurt you? And he said, I believe that she was trying to cleanse you of what she felt was her evil seed that she passed on to you. So that, where, like Annie Russell says, peace to you over there, brings forgiveness. Like I don't have to participate in the relationship with her to forgive her and wish her peace and wellness. So Jim placed my trauma at 16 months of age. And that to me was so specific. And when my brother Joel, when I first came home from my first marriage, just skinny as a bean and very much the fool, my brother Joel, first thing he said to me is, well, if you're going to be self-destructive about this, I guess we've got to deal with it. He's the hermit on the collection of brothers over there. He's the physicist, the brilliant, brilliant man that he is. So, and soon after he said, I think you're externally validated. He said, I think that because Mom would only treat you kindly if you were very cute, or you drew cute drawings. Like she wanted it to be superficial, but she wanted it to be like an extension of herself, like a way that she could present me. But anything that I presented that was other than her was not okay. So I did have this external validation, as Joel said. And he said, as you come to love yourself internally, the way we do, my three brothers, you will be happy. But that's the only way you will be happy. And he also, I think maybe he thought he was lightening the mood, but he said, I want to tell you about a birth memory I had. I'd just come back from the West Coast, where people were eating placentas and stuff. And I was like, please tell me about your birth memory. That would be really great. So he says, I know I was in utero because I could feel the containment of it and the warmth, the darkness, and it was pretty peaceful. He said, but then suddenly I was filled with these emotions of rage and dread and shame and fear. And he had this whole list, and I cut him off because I'm like, that is not a birth memory, Joel. I don't know what that is. And it was a little like Stephen getting shoved into the locker. It was like, no, it's that overprotective part of myself, like I'm big sister to the world. Like, no, that was not a birth memory. That was a nightmare of some kind of illusion. I don't want to hear about it. I don't want to hear about it. And so in therapy, I would call Joel every night. It was once a week for a year. I call him every night and I go, Jim says I have PTSD. That was one of the second session. And Joel goes, I was wondering when you'd figure that out. Like, you knew? And he's like, of course, Kimmy, we all have PTSD. We're all our mother's children. And I was mad at him, but that's so Joel. And I'm like, why didn't you tell me? He's like, because you have to figure these things out for yourself. And it was the following week that he put it at 16 months. And to me, that was like shocking. Like, that was like, how can you tell? How can you tell that I was precisely 16 months old? And he said it's a stage of development. At 1 year, 4 months, a child is exploring their surroundings and begins assessing their own wants and needs. In literature, it states that the child conveys that it wants more. And Jim said, in order to navigate this important stage of development, a child must feel safe and must feel loved. And you did not feel either. So I started to negotiate. I started to figure out how I could get the least negative reaction from my mother. It wasn't even like, how do I get a positive reaction? And I was 16 months old. So that night I came home, called Joe. I tell him this. Jim says I was 16 months old. When I first experienced trauma by my primary caregiver, which, it's Mom. And he was weirdly quiet. Like, my know-it-all, know-everything brother was weirdly quiet. And it was a shorter phone call, and we hung up. And then 2 days later, he called me and he's like, this is also 11 years after I'd been home. And he said, Kimmy, do you remember my birth memory? And I blew up at him again. I'm like, that was not a birth memory. I don't know what that was. That was not a birth memory. And he said, I'm 18 months younger than you. So when I was 16 months old, and he was in utero, and his little body was filled with rage and shame and anger, he was experiencing Mom's feelings when she was trying to rescue me from the evil seed. And so that kind of consciousness propels me still. And that kind of relationship is, I think what's unique about me is that I remember. I think we all have, and I think the trauma made me remember and made me hang on to those lights. Like, if you have a raging mother hurting you, and right behind her, you can see these swirling, shimmering, glorious lights of love. Which one are you going to prefer? Which one are you going to believe in? So that, I think, was available to all of us, is still available to all of us, but I do believe that we forget. We're supposed to forget, and I didn't forget. And then I think the process is rediscovering it, finding it again. So one of my weird side effects in the writing of the second edition of The Day Rue Flew, I've decided it's going to be, I first thought before COVID that it would be totally disclaimers, like a beware what you're entering into, because it's the first book revisited. And one of the weird side effects of me that I was calling like a deformation, like it's a problem, is that I don't have an automatic drive. Like, people who've ever been in a car with me, I know, I see you, know that there is no, everybody's like, let me drive. Because I don't have that place that I understand most people do, where they arrive at a destination and don't know how they got there. Or if they have to maneuver in traffic, it's an automatic response, right? Mine is not at all. But on the other hand, like in one of the talks when I talked about how dog meat and cow meat were no different for me, that was a discovery I had that I realized other people didn't have. Like they didn't feel the same way about dogs as they do about cows. That was in our sacred one, right? And like things like I hear things, and this is probably bad in certain company, but I hear things like, marijuana is a gateway drug for heroin use. And then I was reading different statistics, and by the same mathematics, so is strawberry ice cream. You know, it's like when you want to draw a conclusion based on some evidence, I see it all the time where people are like, fact, 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 and you can recognizable facts, and then conclusion is some crazy, unrelated, ridiculous thing. And when my daughter Lily, who's my high priestess in my tarot, was in the middle school, she had said a couple of unbelievable, amazing things. Like they had to go to DC. But one of the things she was into that I'd never heard of was the flying spaghetti monster. Have you guys heard of that? And she's like, I want this hoodie. And it was like, what did they fly? FSM is my bro or something on her back. I mean, she was hilarious. The pirates, right? Yeah, the whole thing is outrageous. But what it was a response to Kansas trying to do intelligent, what do they call it, creationism. But they had another word for it, that they were going to teach it in the classrooms. And they were saying that it was as valid as any other, like evolution. So this brilliant man, and I know it ended up being a group of people, came up with the flying spaghetti monster because it met all these same criteria to be taught in class as did creationism. So they dropped the whole thing. Because he's like, if we're going to teach this, we have to teach the religion of the flying spaghetti monster. And he had all the same proofs, all the same evidence that that was what had happened. You know, that's how we came to be. So I've always had this, and I'm afraid I've passed this on to my own children. But one of the things that I'd always believed was different about myself, and this goes into the realm of maybe arrogance. This is one of the things I call my kids back on too, like, I think I love better than other people. And I think that I had to come to that conclusion early to protect myself from. Mother would say every day of my life how much she loved me. But that wasn't what she demonstrated, and that wasn't what I observed. And so I was always distrustful and a little sad as I went through my life, and I decided that I would love with all my heart. That was almost a defense mechanism in me. Like no matter what I received in return, I was going to love with all my heart. And that's why I'm a narcissist magnet. Because the trouble is I would seek out conditional love. Because then I'd know what the conditions were. Then I could comply, and then people would be nice to me. So if I looked a certain way, if that's what they required, or if I didn't talk so much, or if I didn't explore all these ideas openly with them, or if I didn't, or if I carefully hid what I was really drawing, they would treat me nicer. They would pretend to love me, or to love me in the way they thought they were loving me. So that's a catch-22, obviously, and my brothers were exceptions, and Stephen forever was, and to this day is an exception, and there have been a few that keep busting through that won't do what I tell them and keep it safer for me, but yeah, it's a hindrance, but it's also how I survived to this point in my life, and so I have to. So when I'm talking about the narcissist, I didn't start out with that vocabulary. And in therapy, we talked about verbal abuse, we talked about substance abuse that leads to verbal abuse, and I read everything, because that's the way of my brothers and I. We read, once we get a clue of something, we read everything. Like Joel, they wanted him to graduate early from high school, and he decided he was going to play football. He never played football before in his life. So he read every book there was about football. So he knew every strategy on the field, and he's athletic enough, like he's strong, he's physically capable, but he's so smart that they would send him out into the huddle so he'd tell the quarterback what to do. And he was just some lineman somewhere, like. But so I read everything about verbal abuse, and one of the things that I kept reading was that there was this hollowness inside of them, that there was their perception of hollowness. And what I would decree is that no one is hollow. No one is hollow. If you perceive yourself as hollow, you might be mean, you might be cruel to other people because you're trying to fill that void that isn't there. So what I read about verbal abusers and went right through several incarnations to narcissists, and what it is they do not feel complete. And so the only power, because they don't have this joined power that is holy, it's the same word as whole and heal and whole, W-H-O-L, like entirety. They don't feel the oneness, the connection to all that is. And so they then must assert power, and they must make you comply with that. So like narcissistic supply is a real thing. Like they want to have that reassurance all the time. They want to have that, what I was willing to give. So once I established their conditions, and their conditions were that they didn't have to face this in themselves, that was weirdly compatible, right? But there was a point in my first marriage, because I really wasn't as aware of any of this in my first marriage, where I was pretty depressed. Like in retrospect, I know I was depressed. And Mick, I'll call him because that's what I call him in the books. And we worked out, we ran every day, we walked every day. That was his thing, but I loved it. And we were walking to get a big oatmeal cookie. That was a thing we did, because he was very regimented. It's like, this is what we're eating, this is how many calories we're burning. Like everything was pretty intensely regimented. He said he'd love me for 30 pounds. Very conditional. But he was very upfront about what his conditions were, and I was compliant. So, but I was depressed, like that takes a toll. So we were walking one day, and again he went at me. He called me Scooter, and he said, we got to figure out what's wrong with you. You are not being my little sidekick. You are not being my distraction. So all I was to him was what I served. And I am entertaining. I've not had a friend who didn't say I was entertaining. So he used my willingness to entertain him and distract him. And he would say, because there is an emptiness inside of me that I never want to face. And when you're you, I don't have to. So we have to figure out what's wrong with you, and we have to fix it. We're going to find the name of it, we're going to fix it, and you're going to be my little Scooter again. You're going to be my little sidekick again. This is during this walk, this was the 100th time he'd said the same thing. But we got home, and he turned on the TV, and I cannot remember who it was a talk show. And it was a man, and I don't think it was Donahue, but it might have been. But there was and I'm in the other room, but he's like, come here, Scooter, listen to this. These people, this panel of people, he said, they sound just like you. They're talking just like you. We're going to find out what's wrong with you, and we're going to be able to fix it. Like this was just confirming everything that he'd felt, everything he just said to me. So I sat down, I listened, and for sure they were. Everything they were saying is what I had been trying to express to him about what I was feeling. And I was like, oh, darn, he's right. Like, there's something really wrong with me. And so he's leaning into the TV till he's almost off the couch, right? He's so excited. And the announcer, like the MC of the show, comes back with his mic, and he goes, we'll be back in a moment with all our former hostages. And he was so far forward and so excited that we were going to figure out what was wrong with me, right? That and he's a big guy. He was like the streak in high school. Mike Streeter, they called him, because he was so fast and so athletic and good at everything. So he fell down on his knees, and he put his head in my lap, and he was crying. And all he could say is, "You got to get away from me." He wasn't going to say, "I don't want to hurt you anymore." He couldn't say he wouldn't hurt me anymore. But he cared enough to say, "You've got to get away from me. Whatever we can do, you've got to get away from me." So that was a moment, and I took it. I ran with it. I called my folks, and I got their credit card numbers. I was going to fly home that minute. And then he was very, very, he was like, "If you want a divorce, let's do it right. Let's go through it." We owned a house. Gave me entire power of attorney as he moved to LA. We did everything like with a kind of sweet friendship closure. Like we would go to movies together. We always went to Tuesday movies because we got married on a Tuesday, so we could go to a Tuesday movie. Yeah, he was quirky. And after he left and I was in an empty house, my brother Randy, the charioteer, drove all the way across the country with a U-Haul, packed me, my dog, my art supplies, and the little clothes that I had, and we drove all the way back again. So I came back to Joel, and that's when he said, "If you're going to be self-destructive about this." So another loop. And when you learn about, let me see. I said all this. So we've talked, previous talks, so this is going to seem jarring possibly, about the spirit guides that I experience. And we talked about the Greshan and Metatron is what I've learned their names are. They weren't named for most of my life, but as I've asked, I've received names for them, and I accept it. I think they could be figments of my imagination or aspects of my higher self, or, like I've said in others, like aliens. Like, why do aliens have to be biological? Like, they could be energy, they could be, I don't know what they are, but I know they're smarter than me. So it's harder for me to attribute, excuse me, it's harder for me to attribute the higher self idea, unless it's way higher and not really associated with the little scooter. But one of the things that Metatron said to me when I was in particular pain, because it was while I was writing Banshee where I thought I was failing. I thought this would be done by the autumnal equinox. This is really what I thought. Like, this would be done by the autumnal equinox because everything's in perfect balance, and I'm all about the, and I always pronounce this wrong because I only read and write, but the Dahitu, the yin-yang symbol, that all was in balance. The seasons, the planet, everything was perfect. And I didn't get it completed by then, and I was beating myself up, and I was on the back of the Harley. Marty's driving it. And he said, so at a certain point, Metatron, in my head, while I'm apologizing, I'm literally apologizing, like I failed y'all. Thank you for everything. And he said, "You've gotten it backwards. It is, you came this lifetime with the intention of giving people the opportunity to not be cruel to you." That was stunning, because in my history, I could think of how many opportunities I had given, and then it's only up to that person whether or not they choose to be cruel to me, because they had a couple, 30 options, and cruelty was only one of them. And when I was, so Splatter Girls isn't one of the books, and have you guys seen them? Has everybody in here seen them? They're over on the far wall. That's where I said that the circle let me splatter paint in their on their displays. But it came about in 2008, which was a pretty difficult year. It was a pretty, my daughter Lily had been in a terrible car accident, broke her pelvis, 7 ribs, bruised her spleen. It was an ICU. They had a helicopter waiting while they were scanning her whole body to see if she had to fly out of here. And during that time, a person that I thought was my friend asked me to share space with her massage parlor and my art and tarot. And I did it. And I wasn't, and this was after divorce. This was, after the second divorce, where I was on pretty good footing. I'd already been to therapy. Like, I thought I was on pretty good footing. But I got sort of side-railed. Like, it was only after I'd been at it for a while that I realized that these were friendships, too, that would not take the opportunity to not be cruel. And so it was specifically her husband, but they made me smaller and smaller. I remember Marty coming over to visit, and he's like, "What are you doing in the corner?" And I'm like, "I'm staying out of the way. Staying out of the way." And it was finally him one day where he said, "I don't know what to do if you're going to let people hurt you. Like, I can't even protect you if you're going to let people hurt you." And I had to look at it differently. And so we had a big arbor there, and my stepkids and I and Marty and I think just Lily, maybe Jake was there. We were painting this, and we got splattered paint on the patio below that was bricks, like loose bricks, like they could have been replaced or turned over. And the husband of my friend went ballistic on me, and I first cowed to him and apologized and was like, "I'll fix it somehow." And I remember him shaking his power washer at me, like really threatening, like all the things that unfortunately I was sort of accustomed to because I invite it. But I'd forgotten that I invited it, and I was very shook up. And then I found this place inside of me, that same place that protected Stephen and protected my little brothers, came to protect me. And I said, "I'm an artist. Splatter happens." And that was a huge moment in time. But during that, again, my brother Joel said, "I'm upset by what they're doing to you, but I'm more concerned about what they'll do to justify what they're doing to you." And I think that is a lot of what we're experiencing now. Like, if people are hell-bent, and I'm going to say it like that, hell-bent on a certain idea, and they don't want it questioned, and then they react in anger to your convictions, to your beliefs, then they might, in some part of themselves, realize they shouldn't have been mean to you, but then they have to justify it. Like, rather than apologize for it, it's like, well, she splattered paint on the patio, she deserves to be treated terribly. But it can happen in, obviously, all realms of our lives. So I've talked a lot about continuums and spectrums and the balance of yin and yang and the masculine and the feminine, and how very few of us are at either extreme. But it's the same for narcissist, right? So you start out with, and I was going to say a non-narcissist, but that doesn't work in the continuum. So you start out like this kind of cute little benign narcissist over here that just needs some attention, just needs a little love. They aren't going to be a fabulous relationship of mutuality, but they're going to be a sweet, less harmful person in your life. And one of the doctors that I listen to, Dr. Romani on YouTube, so she's like, "They're good at a party." They have their purpose, just don't get yourself too invested in them. But it goes all the way to malignant narcissists that are just a few steps away from sociopathic, psychopathic, because they have zero empathy, and they can be extremely unkind. And they don't think of the harm they're causing because they don't care. They literally have lost the ability to care. And those are always dangerous. And as they fall that far out of balance, they fall deeper and deeper into ego. And then they're more apt to try to justify what they've done to somebody rather than take responsibility for it. So, let me see if I have to say all of this. So what I've come to believe is I said this to Joel again. I told you he was going to be a main theme of this, or I guess I told Sarah, that when I was studying reincarnation and I was feeling it, remembering it in dreams and such, I said, I really think that we choose our parents. I think we choose our mothers. And Joel was horrified, just horrified. And I'm like, I really think this. Like, over and over I've seen that this might be the case. And he said, and this is, like, he can be such a smart ass, a genius ass, I call him. He said, okay, Kimmy, maybe you chose Mom, and we chose you. And that's a place, right? That's a place right here. That's why I stay full. But I do believe that maybe I did, because I think that in a very maybe bizarre way, I think that all that I am, all that I create, all the ways that I can see things weirdly, objectively, and a little too harshly, is because of that relationship with Mom. And that maybe I chose that because that's what I wanted to fulfill. And in one of the stories that I told about being hypnotically regressed to the past life, it was a series of crazy events that led up to it when I was 34 years old. And it's like, ghost stories and spooky stories that are going to be part of the second and third book. So I'm not going to go into them here. But I was having nightmares about this particular person, and I was seeing him in my waking, and I went into counseling, and it was Terry Donter, who has family psychology up in Petoskey, and Clyde and I were in there together, and in the middle of one session she goes, do you believe in reincarnation? To me, It seemed very unrelated to what we were talking about. And he was all set to get me medicated. Why she wake up screaming in the night, right? So we set up a session, and it was an incredible experience, and many of my questions were answered. And Will, who had come today, Will Michael, but he had to leave because it was full, and he hadn't registered, he's a hypnotherapist. And he told me, I don't say they're past life regressions, I say they're access to stories, because they work, and people don't have to have a belief system for them to work. Like you have these memories and you're released from whatever neuroses or other issues that you have. So I was all in. I'm like, okay, I'll do this regression. So I learned a great deal about the specific situation, but then at the end of it, I was on that same porch with that same monk that I know as Grishan now, that I talked about in the second and maybe the third one too, of looking at what I knew and recognized from my own spirituality of lights pretending to be flowers, pretending to be in a wind. So there's glorious colors way beyond the scope of what we can see with our human eyes that are in the wind, and they're blowing like this. And as I approached, in my mind, poor Terry, like different times I would just, early in the regression, she'd say, tell me what you're wearing. And I could kind of stop action and reassess myself, right? And I could give her the report. And then as it went on, and as I died, once I died as Ariel, and I went into this beautiful place of light, it was harder for her to make contact with me because I was busy. I was like having a blast. And she did say, I need you to tell me if there's buildings. Tell me if there's structures of any kind, because a lot of people, when they're in this realm, whether it's, levels of consciousness or an actual realm, experience buildings of some kind. And I saw that same porch, and I walked over to it, and as I hit the bottom step, which was not like, there's not gravity, right? But you hit the bottom step and you kind of lift up, and I saw him, and I started laughing. And I apparently was laughing on her couch. And so she said, what's so funny? Who's there? Who are you reacting to? And I said, he's a man from my dreams, and he talks to riddles. He talks about things I don't understand. He uses words I don't comprehend. And he's the whole time laughing at me for saying it. And I said to him, while she's listening, I'm like, is it all right that I remember being Kim? I mean, aren't I Ariel right now? And he said, here, you are everyone you've ever been or ever will be. And of course, she can't hear him. So I'm only reacting to him. And she's like, who is he? Who is he? Is he an angel? And he just uproariously laughed then. I mean, it was just like head back laughing. And I said, I don't think so. And then she said, well, what is he? Is he like a spirit guide or a spirit master? And it was this, like, his face is depicted around here, but it was like he just glowed. He just glowed at me. And he wasn't laughing. It was just this light coming at me. And I said, yeah, I think he's a spirit guide or a spirit master. And so then I went back up on the porch, and she said, from her perspective, I went silent again for her. And he said, did you complete what you wanted to in your lifetime? And I said, no, I failed. I said I wanted to learn about love, and I only loved Ben, which is the reason I was in this regression. And I couldn't have him, so I failed. And he said, but you were an excellent teacher, and you loved your students, and you told all your students that to each their own, that they each could find their own path, and they loved you, so you did succeed. And I was like, oh, because I'm thinking only romantically, as I'm prone to do. And then he said, so what would you like to learn next? And I said, because I'm overwhelmed. I can still see it in my mind. I'm like, I want to find this light and this love and this beauty and this wonder within myself. And he said, and Terry, in perfect concert, said, that's it. So I must have said that part out loud. And I came back. Like, it was like, I came back that instant to her office, and it was like you'd see in a weird movie, like, and then I'm awake. And I'm sitting there, I'm sitting up, and I'm like, I gotta go. And she's like, tell me your name, tell me what year this is, who's the president? I didn't bring you back. Like, you just came back, so I need to establish that you're really here. And I was mostly really there. I'm like, I'm fine. And I went out, and I sat in my car. It was a Jeep Cherokee, and I had no idea if I could drive or not. Which, isn't that unusual for me. So I came back with that mission, and as I've gotten more honest with the books and telling what Stephen insisted I tell, which I was only going to write coded fairy tales, and if you were smart enough to figure it out, then I was good. Because you weren't likely to be mean. And if you weren't, then you just diss them, you just go past them. But when he was still living, and he died 9 years ago, he said, you have to tell the story behind the story. And you have to tell the truth. He's like, if somebody picks up a piece of your art or meets you in person, they're going to have no idea what you're doing, and they won't be helped. They won't be healed. And, he knew me well. He knew that would be the thing that would make me do it. So I started, and with Jen's help, and she's also a Taurus, Stephen's a Taurus, and my Jen's a Taurus, we're like, ground enough, you flighty little air sign, to get it in a way that you can share it, that you can write it and people can read it, and they can have some understanding of what really is going on here. And he wanted it to be a play, and he had all these ideas that were pretty remarkable, and maybe one day it will be. But in the creation of Banshee, Metatron, who I see as higher than Grayshawn, because he's an angelic sort of being, he came to me kind of unexpectedly, and that's more his way. Like, he interrupts my brain. Like, if I'm walking, especially if it's in that kind of, where you're half meditated, and you're walking, I get this, like too much information. Like, I didn't ask for that. He's explained to me about the auras of trees. Like, and all of you can see the auras of trees if you try. I swear. I swear you can, because they aren't wiggling. Their backgrounds are typically neutral. And you can see these beautiful auras. And every once in a while I've seen like rainbow auras, but mostly they're a silvery, pretty tree aura. And one day I was walking and looking at the auras of the trees, and I was thinking about the one rainbow tree that I'd seen years ago. And he said that they were of, the auras, the trees were of simpler consciousness. They were of a pure consciousness. And I was just hearing him, looking at them, and he said, "Do not presume that pure means inferior." And I wanted to say I wasn't, but how do you lie to an angel? So I was like, all right, and he explained that. I'm like, what about the rainbow trees? And he said, those are the highest consciousness that are choosing to be a tree. And they might choose for 2 minutes or 2,000 years, but they're the highest consciousness. So that was pretty fantastic. But one of these other days, the one I was starting to tell you about, where he interrupted my thought patterns, he said, "You have achieved it. You have found the light and the love and the wonder and the beauty within yourself." And I thought I might just have to die. I thought that might be the end of my calling, the end of my story. And he said, "You're in a unique situation where you can now choose if you'd like to have another thing to fulfill." And with him, I don't have to really totally verbalize it, but I said, I would like to share it. I would like to really share it. And he has this strange way of approving that you just feel more than, it's like a nod, but it's like a whole body nod, a whole energy nod. And thank y'all for letting me. Thank every one of you for letting me share the story and making me believe that I'll be able to share it beyond this room and beyond myself. Thank you.